boy, there's been some turbulent news as of late. Not sure if you've heard. There's an ongoing ethnic cleansing ramping up in Gaza after 2 years of radio silence from the largely Zionist-supporting media establishment. Last week, there was another mass shooting where the police came out and admitted that the shooter was radicalized by far-right ideology online. And that was just a few weeks after Robin Westman shot up a Catholic school in Minneapolis with more similar far-right slogans on their guns, which directly relate to other stories of mass school-based violence this year, all stemming apparently from an online effort to groom school shooters in online Nazi circles and places like Discord. But you might not have heard about that. On that note, let's flash back to last year and some news that's probably entirely unrelated. You might not have heard about the Antioch, Tennessee school shooter Solomon Henderson, a black kid who had a manifesto focused on racist conspiracies, or about Natalie Rupnow, a femcel shooter who was similarly radicalized, whose manifesto contained incredibly similar rhetoric and racist conspiracy theories to Solomon Henderson and Robin Westman. Rupnow was 15 when she walked into her school, fatally shot another classmate, a teacher, and then herself. And you may not have heard about these incidents, many of which share rhetoric with several prominent members of the modern conservative ideological movement, but I can almost guarantee you've heard about a trans shooter epidemic or something. Am I right? I mean, you'd think there's this trend of trans violence and trans shooters just running amok in the streets based on the media coverage of certain shootings, where trans people are somehow responsible, even when there's no trans people who have pulled the trigger. Oh, shit. I almost forgot. Charlie Kirk was shot. And it's apparently the most important piece of news in the world at the moment. Yes, Turning Point USA leader and forehead salesman Charles Entertainment Kirk was murdered in broad daylight by a mysterious assassin who was almost certainly an Antifa and probably a trans as well.
Now I have to deal with real safety concerns. It sounds like the shooter was a or pro. And just because I want to protect women, that I'm worried about getting murdered? Are you fucking kidding me?
See, this was from sitting Representative Nancy Mace, not even a day after Charlie Kirk was killed, and it should additionally be mentioned that she knew nothing about anything having to do with the shooter or the motivations of said shooter outside of rampant speculation. And this is about par for the course for Nancy Mace. You've almost certainly heard of her more than any other representative because since she's been elected, she's participated in an endless stream of attention-grabbing stunts and antisocial behavior, like constantly misgendering her fellow representatives and harassing entire minority groups with slurs on air. And now she's packing heat, which she is almost certainly going to aim at a mop she saw in a broom closet because she thought it was a trans person. It is, but that's just how Brianna Wu attends all of her insider Democratic meetings in D.C. But Nancy Mace is far from the only one who made an absolute clusterfuck of the entire situation with her jumping the gun. No, the top honor of the king of Clusterfuck Mountain belongs squarely to FBI Director Kash Patel. And before I go on, I need to explain why. Not just why and how Kash Patel bungled this whole situation, but how we got to where we are now, with podcasters being given hero send-offs with ding-dongs like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino in charge of murder investigations, because honestly, the state of things we're living through right now has been building for a while. Now, several years ago, it went almost entirely unnoticed, but we entered into a new era of conservative influencer, one not so much bound by AM radio and gold investment ads, but tethered to other online movements and conspiracies like QAnon, anti-vaxxers, and others in the same ballpark. And the primary difference between somebody like a regular talk show host and this new era is that this new social media savvy crop of boomers only ever really cared about one thing: numbers going up. Like, could you imagine how much time and effort we could have saved if we just got a bunch of boomers into, like, Destiny or Diablo? Liberated from such petty concerns as on-air standards and practices, fact-checking, conspiracies, and other tethers that keep rational people from just saying whatever brick-wall dumbass bullshit pops into their heads, this new crop consisted of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and, what's her name? The Beetlejuice handjob girl. Lauren Boebert. They all had a distinct lack of anything resembling professionalism, instead resorting to empty publicity stunts to get noticed and elected, And it worked. In all honesty, they just capitalized on the mold of Trump, who is himself a prissy catty queen obsessed with idle gossip and insulting people with dumb nicknames. It turns out that's also a lot of random middle-class white women. Which is why we now have, sadly, though not surprisingly, a government that seems to be run more like a Jake Paul-style content house, thanks to Trump rewarding his loyal sycophants with government positions regardless of their actual qualifications. You can see this additionally with the way the White House appeals and welcomes influencers like known plagiarist and definitely not gay guy Benny Johnson. So now, instead of Trump being constantly pestered by reporters about being a rapist or a pedophile, he gets intelligent, thoughtful questions from people like Benny asking, will big balls get the Medal of Freedom? You've got other big brains like Tim Pool, who's primarily known for stoking fears about civil war and not being able to let go of his teenage years. And then people like them, and serial liar and grown woman with the brain of a trout, Chaya Raichik, aka Libs of TikTok, will be relied on by people like Pam Bondi to break important news, like the first round of Epstein file releases, which was a wet fart of propaganda that everyone immediately noticed was basically just everything that was already public to begin with. And to be fair, this is a really smart tactic. These influencers have no problem lying, misrepresenting, and contorting the news to fit their agenda. And that agenda already aligns with Trump, so they fit right in. They each have massive fan bases and reach that allow them to be propaganda directly to their audiences, spreading what the government wants people to hear while acting as though they're somehow independent journalists. And they also bring with them unquestioned loyalty because they only know success in the form of exposure. And as long as they keep eating out of the administration's hand, they will be rewarded plenty with all the exposure and revenue they can want. And speaking of rewards, we got to talk about the actual appointees under Trump who have no business being anywhere near power tools, let alone power. Like Pete Hegseth, who's like if a high school bully found the Zoltar machine from Big, but instead of turning into Tom Hanks, he became a raging alcoholic. Now, Trump probably likes Pete because of their mutual interests, like sexual assault and financial crimes. But the real reason Pete was gifted the position of Secretary of Defense was because he endlessly filleted Trump for several years as a Fox News host. See, Trump values attention and publicity, not any actual ideas or policy, which is probably why so many of his administration seem obsessed with empty, flashy gestures and posturing. And among these, Pete is one of the most notable examples. For example, he regularly calls out people on social media, like recently gloating about service members being fired over having an opinion on Charlie Kirk. He proudly touts violations of international standards of engagement while also acting like a frat bro. Remember that classified group chat he accidentally added a journalist into and then talked about an airstrike? These are not how any professional acts, let alone someone in charge of national security to any extent. But they are how someone acts when they just want attention. And see, you can keep up with all of this because of social media. Yeah, think back to any other Secretary of Defense. Most of the time, I can't remember their names because their job isn't to be a figurehead or an influencer in front of a camera. Except for Pete, that's exactly what he is. You can follow Pete Hegseth day to day via Twitter and Truth Social, allowing MAGA to form parasocial relationships with yet another personality who will undoubtedly be putting out a book or getting a cushy job on Fox once the administration ends. And all of this is really a preface. I'm trying to connect the points here so what comes next is easier to follow. Years ago, Trump's empty but incendiary rhetoric sparked this trend of attention-seeking propagandists to follow in his wake, and aided by social media and an influencer-level attention economy, now those people are in charge of the government. Which is probably completely fine, right? I mean, we're talking about the public town square. Public discourse is healthy for democracy, like on X, the Everything app, where we have Grok to help check facts and community notes to sift through misinformation. Oh, except that's not at all how the social media world is trending, actually. It's not surprising that misinformation is rampant right now about pretty much any given topic. Twitter, the most widely used social network by influencers and members of the government, rolled back most protections on hate speech, misinformation, and any accountability, and allowed anyone to pay to get a blue check that used to mean the account was verified and someone generally knowledgeable or worth listening to. And with the proliferation of AI alongside an algorithm that favors incendiary rhetoric that gets engagement over fact-checking and actual truth, 4chan-level conspiracy dipshittery has become the intellectual currency of the realm. Facts and truth have become differences of opinion to people who are too cowardly to face the fact that they're simply wrong and would rather spend their lives in an echo chamber. So what do you get when you have a vapid, attention-obsessed leader who surrounds himself with inexperienced but equally attention-obsessed wannabe influencers, and you combine that with an attention economy that is fueled by misinformation, personal bias, and whatever grabs somebody's attention? You get the colossal fuck-up that is the FBI's handling and propagandistic framing of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Let's establish a brief timeline of events. On September 10th, 2025, at 12:23 p.m., Charlie Kirk was shot, and being recorded by a crowd of hundreds, the video instantly went viral. For such a polarizing, prominent media figure, and such a shocking display of violence, it was inevitable it would spread on X like wildfire, given the platform's withering lack of public safety or guardrails for such a thing. And because everyone, especially conservative talking heads, are terminally online, everybody had a hot take despite no news of Charlie's condition or any leads on the shooter. 3 minutes later, the first reactions hit social media from Trump, and a few hours later, Trump was the one who broke the news of Kirk's death on his own social media website, Truth Social. See, the university first sent out a notice that the shooter was in custody around 12:50. Then they released them as of 2:22. By this time, Kash Patel was already on the case and ready to crack it wide open. Well, not quite. Apparently, he was enduring a sit-down meal, and then, afterwards, he would crack it open. At 4:21 that day, he confidently announced that they had the subject and would provide total transparency. And I will talk about this administration's transparency talking point in a minute because it's maybe the most brazen lie they continue to tell, to the point where I think even MAGA is tired of hearing of it, which you could see on Patel's post because he had to come out and issue a correction saying, whoopsie, the shooter was still at large. See, for someone who would be experienced enough to be the head of the FBI, this wouldn't have happened. The sitting director would know to exhibit far more discipline, not just performative transparency, because at the end of the day, this transparency means constantly updating the MAGA base via social media. It's just another in the administration's long line of publicity stunts, except here, they used Charlie Kirk's still warm corpse instead of terrorizing brown people and posting the video on social media like Twitter is just fused with live leak at this point. There's no need for transparency with a highly sensitive issue like this. Just do your fucking job. But honestly, he was just following the pack, as all the other MAGA commentators didn't waste time in cannibalizing Charlie either. Each of them immediately set about reframing a tragedy nobody knew anything about through their own propaganda hyperfixations. And unsurprisingly, that meant immediately blaming trans people, like this clip from the Queen of Beans herself, Nancy Mace.
Transgender was a come on, let's be honest about this.
That's disrespectful.
I really don't care because there are a lot of trans out there that want me dead because I'm a rape victim who wants privacy in the bathroom.
Were it not for being turned in by family and friends, the absolute inept handling of this case may have seen the killer escape entirely, with not one but two false calls that they had been captured, putting the community into an oscillating state of on-off high alert. And all of that can be laid at the feet of this transparency lie. It had nothing to do with transparency and everything to do with Kash Patel's fixation on social media numbers. We've seen for months now, as with the Doge ravaging of various records that we know were uploaded now to an insecure cloud server, putting unknowable civilians' private data at risk, Musk's primary talking point with Doge was the same transparency line. Remember that they'd be disclosing all the massive bloat and extra spending they were cutting to save America money. In the twist everybody saw coming, that didn't happen. The transparency was a lie. That didn't actually explain what they were doing with either the data or how it was going to be overseen. And the cuts were either outright lies or deeply disturbing, like the funding cuts to USAID that is certainly going to result in tens of thousands of worldwide deaths. And the money saved isn't even helping Americans because Trump's spending plans have only continued to inflate. Yeah, this guy is real concerned with saving money with his $200 million ballroom. This is the same transparency that led Kash Patel to an embarrassingly inept display of leadership, evidenced additionally by the fact that when the FBI did actually apprehend the suspected shooter, the announcement was saved for Fox and Friends. Yes, Trump was allowed to scoop the death of Charlie Kirk because despite the messaging about honoring his legacy from the conservative base, Charlie Kirk's death has only been treated as an empty spectacle to capitalize on by anyone not in the audience. Patel is unsurprisingly a loyalty hire. In no world does he have anything that would qualify him to run a fan club, let alone a government agency. Kash Patel does have experience as a prosecutor, like in 2016 when a judge gave him an order of ineptitude for appearing disheveled and unprepared for a trial. Now, as reported from the ABA Journal, it's an exceedingly rare legal order, but does square with most of the rest of Kash's career. Most embarrassingly, he's known for a series of propagandistic books depicting him as a brave wizard helping Trump defend a kingdom from thin stand-ins for Hillary Clinton and the Department of Justice. This is Cocomelon for twice-divorced 50-somethings. And Patel continues to face backlash even as he continues to try and soak up a spotlight. Most recently, he was on Fox and Friends, a apparent morning talk show that's just state media now, to let everyone know that the shooter definitely had a manifesto and they can prove it, but they don't have it. These constant appearances by Kash Patel, like other bizarre press conferences where the Indian man said he would see Charlie Kirk, an American Protestant, in Valhalla, reek of desperation to get public approval. The same Fox and Friends broadcast saw Kash revealing information about a sensitive and ongoing criminal investigation as well. Insider sources have been saying for a while that Kash is obsessed with social media numbers and even that he's encouraged people working under him to post FBI wins on social media. From a report in the Intelligencer, quote, "The day before Kirk was killed, 3 former FBI officials filed a lawsuit accusing Patel of illegally firing them for political reasons. In the 68-page suit, the officials claimed that Patel, together with Deputy Dan Bongino, had overseen a bureau that had become highly politicized and obsessively focused on social media. Former interim director Brian Driscoll said that Patel told him that he could not serve in an executive role unless he was prolific on social media. Spencer Evans, the ousted special agent in charge of the Las Vegas office, said that Patel and Bongino told him and others with his rank to post more about FBI wins online. Stephen Jensen, the former assistant director of the Washington office, claimed he was worried that the emphasis Bongino placed on creating content for his social media pages could risk outweighing more deliberate analyses of investigations. And shit, I didn't even talk about Daniel Bing Bong, the other person apparently in charge of the FBI. See, Dan Bongino is another podcaster, just like Patel was during the Biden administration, using their platforms to defend and proselytize for Trump. So it's honestly no surprise that these guys would run the FBI like attention-whoring gym bros. They got to their loyalty hire positions by working social media numbers, playing along with the Trump base, and engaging in the wider content economy. That's all people like this know. Unfortunately, that's not how things like murder investigations are handled. As a result of Patel's eagerness, many are speculating that the case against Tyler Robinson may be eligible to be thrown out or just undermined due to the incredibly irresponsible handling of the situation and how that can impact a case that may need to select a jury. From a recent Newsweek article examining Patel's behavior, quote, Jill Wine-Banks, one of the prosecutors during the Watergate scandal who is now an MSNBC legal analyst, said on X that revealing DNA evidence violated DOJ rules and risks case against Kirk's killer being thrown out for violations of his constitutional rights. Professor Rebecca Rolfe at New York School told Newsweek that while public interest in high-profile cases can create pressure to speak, detailed public statements about evidence or the investigation risk undermining the fairness of a trial. Quote, "These rules about public commentary are designed to avoid risk, and by crossing over, he's created the possibility of a tainted trial," she said. "The damage is more structural. If your liberty is at stake, those in power must respect your rights so that whatever happens has legitimacy. His thirst for public attention is really inconsistent with his role at the moment." And Patel, the ATF, the FBI, or whoever else probably couldn't care less about fairness, to be honest, as revealed by the entirety of the conservative government crackdown on free speech, but also because these agencies, in their effort to be transparent and continue passing the MAGA narrative along to its influencers and their bases, wanted to get information out there as fast as possible. And would you believe, between multiple agencies and agents and outlets and commentators, that led to an environment where people are still trying to sort fact from fiction, from facts that more and more seem to be factionalized despite coming from official sources. It's yet another moment in a long line of shit that just wouldn't happen if someone experienced wasn't charged. Most responsible directors would understand how incredibly difficult the topic of assassination like this is, and would only be reporting the necessary and verifiable info. Instead, Kash Patel is giving scoops to a morning show for hospital patients who can't change the channel. Information like leaking that trans ideology was on the bullets, which turned out to be a lie. Information that the shooter had a trans partner that may have been a roommate or a furry, or they may have been gay, or maybe they were detrans, and it took days for anybody to get the actual facts. But in the meantime, it all led to constant speculations from both government agencies, officials, and the media that somehow this shooter involved trans people. Why? Because that fit the narrative they want, or at least the one the base will accept. It's easier to believe that this is another example of radical trans violence when they also love to hammer on all these trans shooters. Pay no attention to the straight white male shooter that the same day killed people and was indoctrinated with Nazi rhetoric online, or the ideologically similar shootings where young people are very obviously encouraged to kill others and themselves by online extremist groups. One of those shooters might have been trans, so obviously there's no other connecting issues here and it's just trans people's fault. And Kash Patel's FBI can't really talk about the actual issues with right-wing violence, or at the very least online radicalization that shares a lot of nationalist and extremist talking points with the right wing, because it would directly go against the narrative. If Kirk's death has shown anything, the outpouring of vitriol and sorrow from avowed white nationalists and racists reveal the solidarity they have with the modern conservative movement, at least when it's politically useful. So when the narrative can't be allowed to be that there's anything to do with conservatism or right-wing radicals, it has to be the radical left, the trans people. Keep in mind that Kash has deleted and altered literal hate crime statistics to make it appear as though the factual realities of who are most responsible or likely to be responsible for violent hate crimes leads less to the right and more to the left. Except, if there was all this rock-solid evidence of the killer being left-wing, do you think, given everything he's done so far, that Kash would have any misgivings about showing it to the public? About vindicating the right-wing narrative that there's a terror network of trans leftists? Because we genuinely cannot trust an institution like the FBI when it is being driven by far-right ideologues who aren't interested in actually investigating and solving crimes so much as framing the crimes and themselves to the media, presenting everything in a certain light. It's not time for truth, because that truth is being decided for us. First, that truth was decided by influencers, and now they run everything, and everyone wants to be one. It's how we have this insane spectacle where a sitting vice president is taking time from doing vice president shit to do podcasts in honor of a podcaster, where he is additionally spreading these lies that are now being enabled by not trained agents and agency heads, but other fucking podcasters. This proximity of influencers to people who are supposed to be trusted political figures or journalists, people who many depend on to deliver something resembling truth, has led to a government far more propagandistic than ever before. I mean, America has always exerted propaganda over civilians, but never in such an unfocused, scattershot way. There's no thought put into the implications of what's being said, just how conveniently it fits a narrative they want the MAGA base to follow. Looking at the totality of this influencer government, it becomes more clear just why so many people are mourning Charlie Kirk as some kind of massive, insightful political mind when he was, in fact, just a podcaster and an influencer. Because to the modern conservative movement, your importance has become determined by how loud and incendiary you are and how big your spotlight shines. These people are what passes for experienced politicians now, and they just lost one of their biggest propagandists. And the darkly, morbidly funny thing is that each and every one of them is so bound by a need for attention, you've barely seen a reaction that could be called genuine or heartfelt, even from his closest allies and family. His wife shared this truly bizarre video showing his hands before she mean-mugged the camera and threatened half the country. And then a few hours later, donations were sent out, soliciting donations for Turning Point USA to help continue their mission. They're both millionaires, by the way. The grift doesn't stop. The snake will eat itself, and they learned it from Trump. How many times over the last few years has he turned to similar fundraising gimmicks in response to a random news headline? And speaking of Trump, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention the casual stride he continues to take in his friend's death. First, the offhanded social media post, then after breaking the scoop, he was asked by a reporter how he's holding up, only to talk about his new ballroom. And then, of course, there was the speech at the absolutely not astroturfed and completely very genuine Charlie Kirk Memorial, where Trump basically said Charlie was wrong and that you should hate people. And unsurprisingly, the rest of the influencer sphere has been making this work for them too. Matt Walsh hasn't stopped hammering on the narratives about a trans leftist terror network, while Nick Fuentes, after being potentially implicated by way of public speculation the shooter was one of his groypers, has been running mealy-mouthed damage control, attempting to worm his way back into a mainstream conservative consciousness by being a voice of reason. Alex Jones might have had one of the most disingenuous and disturbing coverages, calling for open violence against the left while basically making Charlie's death all about himself. Even Pete Hegseth had to find a way to get on camera about a podcaster's death, performatively praying with a bunch of random troops, probably as they go get ready to pick up garbage in DC. This is just the world we live in now. Kirk's death has revealed in the most clear definition just how little empathy Trump has for other humans, even ones he knows, but also how little Charlie's life meant to these people. The only person who stopped to try and celebrate his life as a person who could smile and have a good time is Candace fucking Owens. Everyone else has used him as a flag to plant, to blame trans people, black people, start a civil war before even knowing anything about the incident. And the confusion was only made worse by the influencers, both in media and government, who were crawling over each other to get off their hot takes, as nobody had a single piece of verifiable info. This is what happens when you create an environment where reality isn't just fabricated to reflect what you want, as Musk has done with Twitter, but where more fabrication is always encouraged. It's just discussion, you see. It's the town square, and Grok will always use verifiable data unless he uses the data that proves our narrative's wrong, and that's wrong thing, and the robot boy needs to be unwokeified because people are yelling at facts. And the more you yell, the more influence and likes and updates and ad revenue you get. It's free speech. Comedy is legal again. Unless you say something mean about the dead podcaster, then you get put in the gulag. In a very real way, it's fake news, because the shit we see being touted as news can't even be called news because there's often no way to verify it. Just verifying the political slant it's being delivered from. It's a world where information is sourced with "trust me, bro," and that's good enough to hate and ostracize people over. It's no longer the sole domain of daytime cigar-chomping gold hucksters like Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh. Everyone can just become an influencer, start a podcast, and then you see how high and far people have climbed simply for spreading propaganda and lies. How many people do you think are encouraged to leave objective truth and reality at the door, especially when the narratives they want to believe are so much more satisfying? This is our influencer-ran government. None of them cared about Charlie enough to not puppet his corpse to their own ends, and they've all been rewarded several times over with the social media clout and validation they so desperately seek. And that's part of the world we need to accept that we live in now. We have long since witnessed the death of truth, and there's no end to the ways in which the modern political landscape has encouraged each of us to surround ourselves with what is comfortable rather than what's real. But when one singular worldview dedicated to ostracizing others becomes the basis of reality, of news, of discourse, and now free speech, it's safe to say we are not ready for what happens when the only thing the people in charge care about are social media numbers.